Now, installation of ComfyUI is relatively quick, especially if you've already got a few checkpoints downloaded. For this lecture, I'm going to keep it very short and we'll focus on things that might be a little bit different from previous installations that you may have. Now, it should be possible using the technique that we're using for you to continue using other versions of Stable Diffusion without interference. That's what I've been able to find on my system. So the first starting point is Python. Python will need to be installed. Version 3.10.6 is the one that I use, but I have tested up to version 3.10.9. Download this and install it for Windows, and obviously use the 64-bit installer. Now, the next stage is to download Git for Windows. I don't think the version of ComfyUI that we are going to be using strictly needs this one, but I would recommend that you download and install this anyway, because we are going to be using it from time to time. On GitHub, the ComfyUI address is comfyanonymous@comfyui, and I'll have links to the key files that you need to download in the resources for the lecture. Now, what you need to do, if you go down the page, you'll find installing ComfyUI as an option, as a link. And if we go to that, you'll find direct link to download. Now, that is the one that we are going to be using. And the basic idea is that it's a very, very quick and easy install. You download the file. You can right click and save it, and then open it up using 7-zip. Then it is fairly straightforward for you to continue the installation from there. What we'll do first of all is tell you the other stuff that you're going to need to have for the course, and then we'll go into Windows and see how everything lines up inside of the ComfyUI directory. Now, one thing you will definitely need are some checkpoints, and obviously we're going to be working with some Stability AI checkpoints. Now, Stability AI have been very, very active recently, so they are among the most popular, projects right now on Hugging Face. And the ones that we need, we're going to need the Stable Diffusion XL base. The Stable Diffusion XL uses a method known as the ensemble of experts, and they have a paper here which explains this. And if you are more technically minded, you might want to take a look at that paper. It has the basic theory behind the use of latent diffusion with the ensemble of experts method. I really enjoyed reading that one. If we go down a little bit further, we'll find that there are some text here for limitations and bias, which you should be familiar with if you're using these major models. So the model does not achieve perfect photorealism, etc., etc. It's useful to be aware of this, and the key one here is faces and people in general may not be generated properly. So we need to work a little bit on that. There are also some biases which we need to be aware of. Out of scope use. And this is very important if you're doing commercial work, obviously. And then we have direct use. They do say here the model is intended for research purposes only. I've got to say I'm really surprised to see that, because my understanding was that this was going to be a commercial use version. The beta version was research only. So I'm wondering if this is some type of typo. So if you're going to be using it for commercial purposes, for non-research purposes, look, I would recommend just making an inquiry with them just to make sure that it is legit to do that, because my assumption is that they actually have made a copy and paste error there. The license that they have for this one is OpenRail. So you may want to just shoot off a query maybe in the community, just asking whether or not it is actually for research purposes only, or whether it is for commercial use. I think it is for commercial use, but you may just want to make sure if you're outside of the sort of public sector. Stable Diffusion XL Refiner 1.0. This is the one that we're using, and there's a lot of information here which basically ends up with the same sort of limitations and biases information. In the files and versions, we have got the file you need to download. They've got two versions, one which is a little bit newer, and that's the SDXL Refiner 1.0 zero point 0.9 VAE, and this one I believe has a baked-in VAE. There's one which is a little bit older that doesn't have the baked-in VAE, which I would prefer not to use. So although I am using this one, you might want to use that one. You have the option. It's going to be your choice. And if you want to download the separate VAEs, we are going to ignore the VAE 10 and we're going to go to VAE, and there are two options there. I believe the one that I'm using is a slightly different one for this particular tutorial, but I wanted you guys to be aware of those options. The one that I'm using is the SDXL VAE, and if you downloaded this one, let's say a few days after the SDXL launched. The SDXL launched last month, and it is just a few weeks old. So we already have more than one version of the VAEs. And if you have the very original version, I would ask you to update it to this newer one. I believe this is the one that I'm using. And in my software system, I've called this SDXL VAE version 2 because there is a previous one which we really shouldn't be using. And finally, for the SDXL version 1, if some of you guys may be using 1.5, I certainly will be using 1.5, and I don't really want to go ahead and download the Runway ML version of 1.5 because I really don't use that one very much. However, I do use from Stability AI this VAE for version 1.5. So Stability Diffusion XL has its own VAEs. You should not mix those two together. This is the one for 1.5, and this is the one that I am using. So it's the one, I'll link to it here. It's the Safe Tensor one. Now, those of you who are not familiar with the Safe Tensor and Pickle distinction, Pickle files are CKPT files, and Safe Tensor files, they end in Safe Tensor. These ones will work in a limited subset of Stable Diffusion installations, including ComfyUI. The safe tensors are considered safer than the CKPT ones. So the general idea is that unless you absolutely trust the source, like Stability AI, you should use the safe tensor ones. The CKPT ones have a wider application, but you might want to avoid the CKPT versions if you're not 100% sure about the source. Now, for this particular course, we're going to be using a model for 1.5, and that model is going to be Dreamshaper. I'm in possession of Dreamshaper 8 and also Dreamshaper 7. Sometimes we'll use 7, sometimes we're going to use 8. It's a 1.99 download, and this one is very good for photo related outputs and also for fantasy. So you can see some of the designs that they've got here. It's both photorealistic and completely, fantastic. Not all models can handle that, and this one is a very good one for that. So 7 and 8, either one will be fine. And that's obviously Civit-I. I'll link to that one. And also, I think we've already got this one. This is the autoencoder. So there are two autoencoders. I think the MSC one and the FT EMA one. We can use either. I think this one is a little bit more sophisticated. However, these VAEs from Stability AI, they're really trained on safe for work content. So they're not very good for not safe for work. Obviously, some models, I think Dreamshaper is certainly one of those, have got not safe for work capacity. They're much better for that. So if you're doing anything which is a little bit racy, Stable Diffusion 1.5, the checkpoints from Runway, they're not very good for not safe for work. With this one, Dreamshaper, it is much better for not safe for work. A lot of the ones on Civit AI are good for not safe for work as well as safe for work. So with these ones, you'll sometimes find that they have their own VAEs, and you might want to download a version that has a baked VAE, so you don't have to use the one from Stability AI, because it is trained on safe for work content. So when you're downloading these files, sometimes it's a good idea just to take a look at what the author of the what the author has actually written down. And with this one of the things I learned, I actually had to go through and look at some of the older versions in this series. I found out that it's good for both the standard square shaped 512 by 512 stable diffusion 1.5 format, or you can actually go to 768 pixels by 512. So it is good for landscape and portrait, as well as the traditional square format that we use with stable diffusion 1.5. One emerging trend that I've noticed is when you have versions of models, checkpoints for stable diffusion XL, we start seeing this XL everywhere. So either workflows are sometimes called SDXL workflows. Some checkpoints are called Dreamshaper XL. XL there has just become a kind of code for SDXL checkpoints. These are much, much larger than the 1.5 ones, and they're not compatible. They're not cross-compatible. So it is useful that we have this distinction, and it's a nice thing because as soon as you download the file, you know it's an SDXL file because it has XL in the title. Now, the other thing we want to get is the ComfyUI manager. This is something that doesn't install automatically. And what we'll do with this one is to use the installation instructions. Method 2 seems to be the one that is designed for the portable version of ComfyUI. And it basically involves downloading a file, dropping it into a directory, and then clicking it. And then it should install. And that will give us the appearance that you will see in my version of ComfyUI. Now, the actual installation process could not be simpler. You download the zip file, you unzip it, you'll get a folder, which is called ComfyUI Windows Portable. We open that bad boy up, and what we see here is a few folders. We'll have just a bunch of files here. We don't want to go and run NVIDIA GPU BAT immediately. We want to go into ComfyUI, and inside of ComfyUI, there are a number of folders that are going to be really useful for us. But in the first instance, we want to go to models, and inside of models, we go to checkpoints, and then we drop one of the checkpoints. It could be Dreamshaper, it could be the SDXL refiner or base. We want to have at least one in there. Now, I've got some older versions as well, and you can see I've started to organize them with the old 1.5 versions from Runway. I've put them in their own folder, probably never to be used, but we'll be making plenty of use of Dreamshaper. I've got the alpha version for XL. We've got the 1.0 versions for SDXL, the ones from Stability AI. And as long as you've got one of these in there, the installation should actually run well. It should not be any problems. But how do you actually install? In the home directory, in the ComfyUI Windows Portable directory, we find run NVIDIA GPU.bat. Now, in order to really get the most out of this course, you gotta be running the NVIDIA GPU 8 gigabytes. Therefore, I'm going to assume everyone's doing that. Double click on that, and it will open up a Windows terminal and start the installation process. Now, the installation process should be fairly quick because we've downloaded most of what we need, including that checkpoint. Now, on my own system, I use a program called Windows Terminal. And Windows Terminal, you get it from the Microsoft Store. It comes from Microsoft, and it allows you. It's got a tabbed interface, and you can create as many tabs as you want. And it allows you to. You can actually use the command prompt Windows PowerShell. There's a little bit. I find it easier to use than just using the command. And when I need to run something, I'm going to change it to the directory for the ComfyUI installation. Then I'm just gonna bring up the command. You just put a period and a backslash before running the command, and that will open up ComfyUI. Now, ComfyUI, when it first installs, will take a bit longer than the amount of time it will take after that. But once it's finished installing, it should automatically open up a window. And when it does that, you will see something that looks like this. So this is the default. And if you haven't got the default space, you can go ahead and say load default. And you'll have something that looks a little bit like this. Now, after you first run the ComfyUI, I would recommend shutting it down and then installing the manager. Once you've installed the manager, you'll have this button up here, and it will give you a bunch of options that are not available by default. We'll take a look at the options associated with the manager afterwards. But installing the manager is really as simple as downloading the file that they ask you to download, and then placing it in the correct directory, which is the one shown here. And you can then just double click and it should install automatically. It should be ready for you to run the second time that you run ComfyUI. Now, what you should do is shut it down first, install this, and then open it up a second time. That way it will have installed the ComfyUI manager. We'll take a look at the ComfyUI manager and its prowess in the next lecture.